Chapter 21 of the Famous Men of Rome. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James Christopher. Famous Men of Rome by John A. Heron and A. B. Poland. Chapter 21, Julius Caesar. 1. Of all the Roman heroes, the greatest was Gaius Julius Caesar. He was a very remarkable man in many ways. He was remarkable as a soldier, statesman, scholar, and as an orator. He wrote a history of his own wars which is one of the best ancient histories that have come down to us. It is called Caesar's Commentaries, and it is used as a textbook in all schools where Latin is taught. This famous Roman was tall, handsome, agreeable in his manners, and of a gay disposition. He liked songs and stories, and even when he was a great general, he often was as merry and frolicsome as a boy. Sometimes, however, he was stern and cruel instead of kind and forgiving. Caesar was a member of the Julian family, which was one of the first families in Rome. 4 Caesars of this family had been consuls of Rome in 1 century. The aunt of Julius Caesar was the wife of the great leader Marius. Naturally, Sulla was Caesar's bitter enemy, and did all he could against him. In that young man there is many a Marius, Sulla is reported to have said. However, by keeping out of Rome, Caesar was able to escape the traps laid for him at Sulla's orders. As soon as Sulla died, Caesar returned to Rome. Although he was a rich noble, he became a friend of the plebeians and always supported their cause. He spoke a great deal in the forum upon political questions, and the people looked upon him as their champion. They elected him to several public offices, one after the other, and thus his influence and power were much increased. At last he was appointed governor of Spain, which was then ruled by the Romans. On his way to Spain, he stopped for a night at a little village among the mountains. One of his companions remarked that perhaps in that small place the people had their contests and their jealousies, as well as people in large cities. "Poor as this village is, I would rather be first here than second in Rome," said Caesar. Caesar was very successful in Spain, and the Romans were so pleased with his conduct that when he came home they made him consul. During his consulship he had many good laws passed. When about 40 years old he was given command of an army, and for some years followed the life of a soldier with wonderful success. The Roman armies were formed of regiments called legions. Each legion contained over 3,000 men, who were sometimes called legionaries. The weapons of the legionary were a short sword and a long spear called a pilum. Besides spears and swords, the Roman soldiers used slings for hurling stones against the enemy. They also had a machine called a ballista for throwing stones too heavy for hand slings. The military standard of the Romans was a figure of an eagle borne on the top of a pole. Each legion had one of these, and the soldier who carried it was called the eagle-bearer. Other standards were also used by the cohorts, or companies, into which the legions were divided. Caesar's first great battles were in Gaul. The Romans called all the inhabitants of that country Gauls, although they were of many nations and spoke different languages. The Gauls were brave, but Caesar proved to be a great general, and in a few years he conquered all Gaul. The Roman soldiers had great confidence in Caesar. When he led them, they believed victory was certain. He was strict in his discipline, but very friendly and pleasant with the men, and he often gave them praise. He himself shared in their hardships. Day after day he marched on foot at their head through heat and rain and snow, and fought with them in the front ranks. On one occasion Caesar built a very remarkable bridge. He wanted to get across the river Rhine with his army, to punish some German tribes who were in the habit of attacking the friends of Rome in Gaul. There was no bridge. The Germans used to get over in small parties by swimming, or in small boats. But a large army could not cross in this way without a great deal of trouble and loss of time. So Caesar resolved to build a bridge. He quickly set his men to work, and they finished the bridge in 10 days, though all the wood had to be cut down in the forest and carried to the riverside. One of Caesar's greatest victories in Gaul was the taking of Alesia. This town had very strong walls all round it, and it was defended by a great army of Gauls, commanded by a brave chief named Vercingetorix. Caesar surrounded the town with his army, and prevented food from being sent in to the inhabitants. He also defeated an army that came from other parts of Gaul to help the Alesians. Vercingetorix then had to come out from the town and give himself up to Caesar. After many conquests in Gaul, Caesar sailed over with an army to the island of Britain, now called Great Britain. The natives were a wild, fierce people, and they fought bravely against Caesar and his army. But the Romans were victorious, and they took possession of Britain, and for over 400 years the island was a part of the Roman Empire. 2. Caesar was engaged 8 years in his wars in Gaul and Britain. It is said that during these years he conquered 300 tribes or nations, took 800 cities, fought battles with 3 millions of men, and made 1 million prisoners. He obtained immense quantities of treasure in the conquered lands, and he himself, as commander of the victorious armies, kept a large part of it as his own share, so that he became very rich. Caesar's wonderful victories made him a great man in Rome. The plebeians rejoiced at the success of their leader and favorite, and were ready to welcome him with the highest honors whenever he should return to the city. But Caesar had now made up his mind to become the master of Rome, so he began to plan and to work to destroy the power of Pompey, who at that time ruled public affairs in Rome almost completely. In order to gain still greater favor, Caesar sent a number of his friends to Rome to spend immense sums of money in various ways to please the people. They got up splendid games and feasts, they divided large quantities of corn among the poor, and they paid the debts of hundreds of men who had influence among the plebeians. The people knew that all this was done at Caesar's expense, and they praised and loved him for his generosity. Pompey, with a great show of authority, now ordered Caesar to disband his army and send the soldiers to their homes, for he said that Caesar had no need of an army any longer, as he had finished his work in Gaul. But Pompey, too, had an army at this time in Spain, and Caesar said to him, "If you will disband your army, I will disband mine." This made Pompey very angry, and he got the Senate to pass a law declaring that Caesar was a public enemy and must be put down. One senator asked Pompey what he should do if Caesar should come to Rome with his army. "What should I do?" cried Pompey, in a tone of contempt. "Why, I have only to stamp my foot, and thousands of men will spring up to march under my orders." At that time Caesar was with his army in the northern part of Italy. When he heard what the Senate had done, he called his soldiers together and made an eloquent speech. He told them of the injustice that Pompey and the Senate had done to him, and he concluded by saying, "This is my reward for all that I have done for my country, but I shall go to Rome and establish an honest government of the people, if you, my brave soldiers, will be faithful to me." The soldiers answered with a loud shout, saying, "We shall be faithful to you. We will stand by you to the last." Caesar then started with his army, and marched rapidly through northern Italy until he came to the banks of a little river, at that time called the Rubicon, and known as the southern boundary of Gaul. What river this was no one can now exactly tell, but it is supposed that it was some one of several small rivers which flow into the Adriatic Sea south of the river Po. Caesar halted his army at the Rubicon, and forbade anyone to cross it until he gave the order. He stood for some time on the banks in deep thought, as if trying to decide whether he should cross the river and proceed, or give up his dangerous undertaking. He was still within his own territory as commander of Gaul. If he should cross the Rubicon, he would be on territory directly under the government of the officers at Rome. By law it was made an act of treason, to be punished with death, for any Roman general to enter this territory with an army without permission of the Senate. "We can retreat now," said Caesar to some of his officers who stood near him, "but once across the Rubicon it will be too late to draw back." While Caesar was talking, a shepherd came along from a field close by, playing lively music on a reed pipe. The soldiers gathered around him to listen to the music, and some of them began to dance. One of Caesar's trumpeters stood among the soldiers, with his trumpet in his hand. The shepherd saw the trumpet, suddenly seized it, and walked to the bridge over the Rubicon, which was but a few steps off. Then he put the trumpet to his lips, sounded the stirring notes for an advance of the troops, and began to march across the bridge. "A sign from the gods!" shouted Caesar. "Let us go where we are thus called. The die is cast." So saying, he turned his horse right into the stream and rode across the Rubicon, followed by his army. It was a daring thing, even for Caesar to do, and the phrases, "He has crossed the Rubicon," "The die is cast," are now often used to mean that a bold or dangerous step has been taken from which there is no drawing back. There was no one to oppose Caesar as he marched through Italy. On the contrary, city after city surrendered to him. There was very little fighting.